So I'd like to start with one of the slides that Annie showed, about that brands have always been a proxy for trust, so helping to drive choice. So, but the context changed completely. So I'd like to hear from each one of you, what does trust mean in your organization today, and how that changed over the last 3 to 5 years? Maybe start with you.
Mm-hmm. Morning, first of all, everybody. I tend to slightly, if I'm honest, disagree that it fundamentally changed over the decades. If I remember it right, you had the 3 decades. We said the good old world, then we had the social kicking in, now we have the AI kicking in. I personally think that the basic function of a brand and the basic function of trust has always been the same in these different eras. And I also think that in the end, trust, and we have a lot of debate internally on trust as well. Oh my God, can we position as trusted partner to our business, whatever. Everybody is aiming for it. So I think trust is a very important topic, of course, but I tend to see it not as a thing that you manage, but it's an outcome in the end. So a brand is what it does. So what are we doing? What are we building? How are we delivering? And this delivery, that changed quite a lot. Probably even perception changed a lot over the different eras that we have. But in the end, it's always this consumer thing where you build a perception and then you deliver against it, or you don't deliver against it, and then you have a disappointment there. But I don't think that it basically changed that much over the time. It's always been a very important outcome or driver underneath, but it is not the attribute per se, in my opinion. And if you look at the trust, I can't remember exactly what it was in the new era that we have with AI. I think everybody is very skeptical. So if you would ask people outside, do you trust ChatGPT? Do you trust Trophic or all these companies out there? Or do you trust a Meta? I don't know whether you say yes. Yet, what is it per month now? 220 million people worldwide use one of these platforms each month. So we all use it, and we share the deepest insights with the AI platforms that we have there. So our acting is very much different from what we say, what we do. And if we ask trust, we say, oh, do you trust? It's a question. I'm not sure. We show trust in the action that we do. So yeah, people probably don't fully understand, and they are a bit scared, and I'm also scared personally on what's going on there. But the action is something different. So sometimes I'm not sure whether the question is the right question, if I'm totally honest.
Yeah, it's interesting because trust, of course, is contextual as well. So you might trust the product and the service, but not necessarily trust the integrity of the company. Such organization.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you. What about you? How is trust talked about inside PwC now? And did you see that changing, like in the old days, pre-internet, and then with social media, and then now with AI?
Yeah, well, trust, of course, is a very interesting debate within PwC because we effectively, through the audit, sell the stamp of approval that a company can be trusted, but we are also aspiring to be a trusted brand ourselves. So it's kind of an interesting, and I know that David likes this fact that I think Waterhouse and PricewaterhouseCoopers invented the audit because of the information asymmetry between businesses and customers. And so, this idea that asymmetry of information is what creates distrust, right? Particularly for shareholders. So it's, of course, a very hot topic within PwC. I agree, again, with what David was saying about reputation versus trust. And a quote that I like about trust is that it's a confident relationship with the unknown. And as our clients are going through, all of the changes that you referred to, and we are in an unknown and uncertain environment right now, with people behaving in irrational and unreasonable ways. And so that means that our clients are increasingly looking to us to help them to deal with and navigate the unknown. And so therefore, for us, being a trusted brand is critical in order for us to help to do that. One of the things that I do see changing, though, is those proof points that people are looking for to be trusted. So when I started marketing in the kind of late 90s, particularly in professional services, having longevity almost kind of bought you trust. Whereas today, particularly if I think about my children, for example, longevity is almost a reason not to trust the brand, right? Because it makes you irrelevant and somehow you're sort of something skeptical for that generation about all of the causes of those things that you showed on those charts, and feeling that those businesses that have had longevity have contributed to the world that we're in today. So I actually think that it's not that the importance of trust has changed, but the way in which you talk about what it means to be trusted has changed because of the generations changing.
Okay, great. For Lego in general, or LNG, sorry?
Yeah, so look, trust has been falling for as long as I've been in business, which is quite a long time. I remember as a fresh-faced graduate of the Barclays Management Development Program in the 90s, I was presenting on the falling of trust. So this is true. Edelman shows it to be true. I think what's interesting is that Edelman also shows the shape of trust is changing. So there's something about sort of proximity and identity and values, which is coming very much to the fore. People trust government and media less, but they trust neighbours, friends and family more. For example, 7 out of 10, I think, in the 26 survey of people were saying that they wouldn't grant their trust at all to a firm if they didn't believe in their values and their kind of positioning in society. And there's a lot of kind of focus on leadership. I think there's quite a gulf in people's expectations versus belief that CEOs of businesses can deliver on building bridges and trust. So the shape's changing. So I think it's really interesting to understand that this decline has been a very long-term thing. What does it mean for asset management? Trust is very much at the heart of what we do. We're asking firms, individuals to entrust their pension savings to us. So we absolutely need all elements of trust. I think your 3 categories of trust are extremely useful. We'll talk about those in this discussion. I think the really central one in asset management is the functional trust piece, which gets you in the door, and it's got this incredible intertemporal conundrum that we face. We are essentially asking people to give us capital on a fiduciary basis to manage for their savings and their retirements, but the functional evidence for that is backward-looking, which is performance, and we are legally obliged to say that performance is no guarantee of future value. So there sits that conundrum that we face, and that's just to get you in the door. That doesn't win you the business. So it's a hugely kind of complex area, but sort of being clear on those components of trust and how they sort of drive through the customer journey with you is extremely important.
Just pick on this point, because you're probably going through some quiet periods of people not engaging with the organization, and then when performance drops, say, suddenly you receive a call, or there is a little bit of that question about can I keep trusting that? How do you manage those quiet periods to build trust with your either intermediaries or with your end clients versus?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In brief, there aren't many quiet periods with institutional audiences. So yes, there are times of market turbulence where a macro event or a market disruption happens when we are working quickly to communicate what's going on to our client base. Absolutely essential. But remember, the buying journey in institutional asset management is very long, very fragmented, very disintermediated. It can take up to 2 years. So in terms of the shape of our marketing funnel by design, we have quite a bulge in the consideration phase, where we are continuing to connect with people through content marketing, through thought leadership, through sort of general messaging, so that we can keep that relationship maintained during that process. When you get to the end customer, whether the sort of members of our DC schemes or people who are buying our investments through financial intermediaries or platforms, I think people are increasingly engaging with their investments in a DC world, but at the same time, we put a lot of effort through our workplace business into engaging with those members. So video statements are a good example. We have a Decades Ahead campaign at the moment, which is talking about pensions adequacy. People in my age cohort who have missed a bit, fallen between the gap of the end of DB and the starting of auto-enrollment. We are looking at ways in which we can kind of stimulate that debate and encourage engagement with that program. So there's actually quite a lot, depending on the client or the customer segment and the stage of the journey.
So no quiet periods. Keep going.
Not really.
So for both of you, if we think about the functional, emotional, and societal elements of brand and trust. What does that mean for you? Maybe starting.
I can start. So, I mean, the functional is sort of, you've got to be able to do the job to get through the door, and in a sort of similar way, but within a different context. There are a lot of people who influence our buying cycles, and so, you know, having a good knowledge of what your brand does, how you can add value, how you can help clients to do what they need to do is important. And we don't always know who everyone is in that buying influence group. And actually what we've seen from our research over the years is that actually that's just getting bigger and bigger. So I think particularly as the economy gets harder to operate in and companies have less money to invest in things, there are some things that we sell that they have to invest in. So, you know, audit and tax, for example, but there are some that are more discretionary, like some of our consulting work, potentially even some of our deals work. So there what we're seeing is that the pipeline's getting longer. So then the role of marketing and brand sort of helping to kind of keep that consideration through that longer pipeline, but like what you were saying, becomes very important to us as well. And then people rightly expect large global brands to play their part in society in whatever way, shape or form that takes. And I actually think that that's a good thing, and that's for me one of the reasons why I'm attracted to working in big brands. I think you can have an extremely positive impact on the society that you serve. Whether that's through the things your employees do, what you invest in as a company, or the values that you uphold. So we see all of those things being important, and actually certainly when we are looking to expand our share of wallet within our existing accounts, some of those emotional and societal things start to matter more because the functional is just a given.
Okay. Do you have any example of either the emotional or the societal ones that you focus more on, you know, as an organization?
Oh, well, I mean, so for example, like a lot of large companies, we fund trust effectively that does a huge amount of work all around the world to help societies. Then within each country, there's quite a lot of specific to that country activities that PwC in those countries takes part in. So that's kind of on a societal level. Then we're also doing things on behalf of our clients. So we do a lot of work with regulators. We do a lot of work with institutional bodies. So it sort of takes a lot of different forms. But I certainly think that you see, for example, our employees are effectively our product in a company like PwC, and part of the attraction of working for PwC is that you are able to bring your own self to work, that you are able to contribute back to your community in all sorts of different ways. So it's also part of our employee attraction and retention program too.
Okay. Yeah, so contextual, but also keeping a little bit of that flexibility to what is most relevant to either the region or to the specific office.
Exactly.
Okay, wonderful. For Vodafone.
I can probably build a bit on what you just alluded to when it comes to societal responsibility, if you want. And you said, it makes you proud working for PwC. And this is how I see it as well. So for me, the whole purpose debate, if you want, we have an internal purpose that we have for years where we say we believe tech is a means for good in the world, and we want to use tech for good. It's not always there. It's bad side and the dark side of it. But we can do a lot that helps society. With technology, for example, energy crisis, can you find smarter solutions? With technology that uses less energy, all of this. I wouldn't say that purpose campaigns then is a good thing. I think to me, the purpose and saying why we do what we do and why do we believe that the products that we build, the resilience investments in networks, the innovations that we do, why do we believe it is important is a very, very strong galvanizer internally to get people there and really drive this identification and get the best outputs out. I wouldn't say it's anyhow relevant for consumer communication out there unless you have a very concrete topic that you want to have and say, hey, why don't you use this smart calculator, or why don't you use this battery reduction? So it's more this internal, while I truly believe that there is a role that there is a responsibility that companies need to take. I found it, by the way, very frustrating, this Edelman and trust thing, when you see, oh my God, there is more trust in companies than in governments nowadays. Is it positive? Is it negative? I think it's very negative because it shouldn't be that way. But of course, companies need to take their responsibility. When it comes to this emotional, functional, to me, again, even the Ryanair communication and positioning, you said this is a functional positioning. To me, they have a very emotional positioning. It means don't be an idiot. Buy here because you get a super good service and you don't pay too much, which is a very emotional payoff. But I think they always very much work together, and you need to function first. Telco, if I take our telco business, is in a way a very frustrating business. We always take ourselves super important, but in the end we are not. For consumers, normally they trust us if we just do our work. And normally they don't even know whether they trust that, but they do, of course, because they give us their money, they give us their data every time, everything. So I would say in the acting, I see a lot of trust, but we don't reflect over it because it just should simply work. Sometimes very frustrating internally as well. Then, and that is 99.9% of the cases, it is kind of invisible, it doesn't matter, it just needs to be there. And then there is this 0.1% of situation where you have an outage, where you have a breach in any data stuff that goes out, or simply your Wi-Fi at home doesn't work. It's a massive crisis for the family, and this, of course, can erode a lot of the perception that you build. At the same time, to me, these are the hero moments. This is the moment where you can show, hey, you really tackle the problem. Because most of the time, we don't have the opportunity. We just discussed a program, very simple, internally, where we say, how can we improve our customer experience also with new technology behind? And I think the bread and butter is just this boring, just make it work, be the reliable friend, take the friction out of the system, solve the problems before they occur. Super boring. But I think that is the thing that people expect, but then you have the few hero moments. And in the hero moments, of course, you have the opportunity to show a bit more, to really be there to solve the problem and use them positively, not in solving the problem for them and probably over-solving a bit. And this is how we approach it. I
just want to build on a couple of things there. So certainly I think, and I hope it goes without saying, like, if you try and market into the societal thing and it's not true, I mean, we've all had that greenwashing, don't do that. But on the emotional point, it's kind of interesting in some of the B2B space because it's a bit intangible. So when it really comes down to it, when we say, okay, why did you choose us over our competitors? Tends to be, we just kind of liked you more, or we felt like you kind of got us, right? Like, so it is emotional, but you can't really market into that because the dynamic of this process is kind of held by procurement and is felt to be sort of very unemotional. So you kind of have this quite interesting thing going on, which is where trust becomes incredibly important. So I just wanted to say that because it's just the dynamic of what you buy is different. And of course, you know, if I buy the wrong toothpaste, it kind of doesn't really matter, right, at the end of the day. But if I make the wrong decision on some of the things that we sell, you're going to get fired. And so there is a huge emotional construct within that. And I know that there's a lot of work that's been done around kind of buyability and this whole IBM, you never got fired from IBM, right? But that's where the big trusted brands do tend to win out because you're making a very big, potentially life-altering decision, but not even on behalf of yourself, really. Yeah. And so therefore you do absolutely get a massive dividend if you are a trusted brand.
I assume that's the same for asset management, this likability. I just liked, the people. And maybe together with that question, how do you build that internally? I know this is one of your big passions, so if you can talk more about it.
Yeah, look, I strongly agree with the comment, right? The three kind of levers of trust that we're talking about, they all have a kind of important role to play. The functional I've talked about. I just add on to that the investment universe is very large. It's very difficult to build that functional trust across all of it. That's why partnerships are so important for asset managers. The partnership that we've talked about today on the Global Brands ETF, for example. We've also done something similar in cyber and AI in our thematic ETF range. We've partnered with Blackstone to sort of work on innovative private credit solutions together. So that's one way of building functional trust that I'd add. On the relational point, absolutely. This is client centricity. It is people buy from people in B2B industries. It's very, very difficult to market because everybody says they're client centric. So if you actually are, how do you market that? It's if you say we're client centric, if you proclaim it, you're lost. So actually you just have to demonstrate it, and that's that's to the point of the internal mechanisms, which maybe we'll come into. But the way in which your kind of core narrative and messages flow through all of the people in the firm, particularly the front line, your distribution people, your investment specialists, what mechanisms do you have whereby that message can land consistently through those kind of conversations? It's a very interesting internal organizational challenge for a CMO. And then I just say on the ethical point, I think this is probably the most important in our industry. It's where things are won or lost. The others are sort of table stakes. But your approach to ESG, responsible investing, the transparency of your fees, all these issues are hugely important. And there are things we can do in marketing to bring that to life with campaigns like the Decades Ahead one I mentioned, which are very much looking at solving societal challenges around pensions adequacy, to the activity of one's stewardship team, so you can bring out the kind of the activities of that. You can take a stand, you can align to the purpose. For us, it's investing for the long term, our futures depend on it. And that, if you can land that with credibility and authenticity, is incredibly supportive of what we do.
And how do you build that internally? Because, in your case for retail, the people who are representing the brand on the day-to-day, and for both of you and the people that are dealing directly with the clients, how do you build those internal capabilities and for people to actually represent the brand? Maybe starting with you, Angie, and then...
Yeah, it's a really good question. There are many elements to it. Like, one is that of the 4 Ps that will be dear to all of our hearts, in asset management, marketing only is involved in one of them, promotion. The others, price, place, product, are all kind of maintained by technical teams. So you have to recognize, first of all, that you have to find a way within your marketing organization to make sure that you are creating the architecture across all of these things, which some you control, but many you just influence. And I take the example of a customer journey through the marketing funnel, the sales funnel, the existing kind of service kind of experience. If you want to take a client on a kind of an integrated journey through those things, you need to create mechanisms in your messaging frameworks, your content management systems, and the authenticity of the messages that permeate them, that others outside of marketing and the other teams will feel are credible, will survive the elevator test, that they can talk to them with a straight face, and that you will have that kind of consistent narrative running through all those multitude of touch points. Decks are a good example. Presentations, they're the main medium still for an asset manager to communicate with the outside world. We produce thousands and thousands of them a year. Most of them are not produced by marketing. Mm-hmm. So how do you create an architecture, sort of templates where that messaging is consistent? And one of the passions I have is that the execution is everything. Yes, know your theory, but then choose deliberately how to amend that theory when it comes to executing in an environment like ours. And you need to work very hard to internalize all the capabilities in your marketing team rather than relying on external agencies, because it's that internal talent, some of whom are sitting here today, who will know the stakeholders, will know the complexity of our business, who can take the time to really work through the complexity of what we do and distill that into messaging that has credibility, that has authenticity, that can flow through your materials. Mm. And I have never found that external agencies with a more B2C kind of mindset, a single universal recognizable truth, or whatever methodology you want to use, that kind of distilling that to one line takes it to a level of abstraction that then doesn't survive through these touch points. And that's why I'm passionate about insourcing and building marketing centers of excellence that can actually kind of take you all the way through that journey.
Okay.
Well, I totally agree with that on the agencies. And I also wanted just to reflect on something else that you said. It's kind of interesting. So when we look at our buyer journey and what matters at different points, actually we find things like ESG, inclusion and diversity, stop mattering quite quickly because they're assumed to be table stakes. You don't even get through the door if you're a company like us and you don't have that. So it's a sort of more of for us, it's a hygiene factor rather than a final mile factor. You wouldn't, they just wouldn't even consider you if you didn't have it. So it's sort of interesting, different ways of thinking about it. So for us, one of the things that I've been doing since I've come to PwC is trying to kind of move a little bit this line between standardization and flexibility. And what we got to in our last brand refresh was that we really needed to rethink that. So what was happening in the past was the PwC was quite rigid about what you could say. And so then what we saw was the brand was being used in 1,000 different ways and it was just chaotic. And instead what we said was, well, actually, the whole point of engaging with our people in PwC is for the unique, specific experiences that they have and they bring, and the group of people they can bring in to help your problems, and the fact that they can engage with you in a relatable way. So instead, should we just hold the kind of container constant? So let's have a consistent brand look and feel. Let's really look at having some codes within that stay absolutely the same. But what you say within that, actually, let's just be a bit more flexible about and do things more in the spirit of the brand, rather than if you're talking about this, you have to use this line and you have to use these words, because that's just then what happens there is you create a lot of, so people are generally compliant, so they'll do that and then they'll just create chaos over here. So we just shifted where we said it was important to be uniform and consistent, which is into the brand. And I know that, Mark, you talk about this, like just be ruthlessly consistent and don't get bored of your own messages and go off and do crazy things. Let's keep that consistent. For the rest of it, you build a lot of relevance, because that's really the differentiation for our business.
Yeah, because of course your people see the brand all the time, but not necessarily the external world. So you need to keep driving that.
Well, the people see the brand all the time, but they also, I think that if you're in an organization that has a really strong brand, actually people don't understand the value of that. And so a big part of making the case for the refresh of the brand was really reminding, and we use brand finance data amongst other sources to remind people how valuable the brand actually is. Because if you've got it, you sort of take it for granted. And one of the things that we did as we were making the case is we actually took people who'd left PwC to set up their own thing or to go to small companies to come back and say, oh, I thought it was me. I thought I was the brand and people were buying Antonia. But actually, when I got outside and I started picking up the phone, I realized actually they were buying PwC. And so and we all laugh about that, but that is the reality if you're in a strong brand. And I learned a lot from my CMO at Accenture when she made the case for the brand, because it was in exactly the same place. Everyone was like, we've got a strong brand, we don't need to invest in it, everything's good. And in fact, actually, sort of not quite the case.
Okay. Anna, do you have anything to add in terms of internal?
I was just thinking, where do we probably differ or not? Of course, the industries are very different. I think, how do you build this and how do you build the consistency? It's 2 points. First of all, at least in our industry, the right scale, the right investment is fundamental. So you have to have a good fundament on which you're standing. You may have seen on the way here, we just have out a campaign around the nation's network because we just had a merger we invest behind. This is more an information point, if you want, but I think it's a really important fundament. But then, besides this fundament, it is more around how do you build the integrity and the consistency. And to me, the consistency becomes more and more important the more complex the world also gets. And how do you build this consistency in each and every frontliner? And here, I think we have kind of a similar approach. I call it the freedom within a framework. You can't control anything and everything, and I don't want to control everything. It's impossible. We are a big brand spread around many countries, and also we are not a very centralized organization, unlike the big tech platforms, for example. And that has good reasons, because we are also, from a regulatory standpoint, we need to have in each country that we operate, because it's critical infrastructure. You need to have an organization in the country, you need to have a P&L on the country, and normally who holds the budget, holds the power, so you're a very decentralized organization. But how can we make this and use this to our advantage? And this to me is always freedom within a framework. Have a very clear framework, a super ruthless one. Have the idea, what should the brand stand for? What is the outcome that the consumer should have from each and every contact that we have? But then empower everybody to implement it themselves. Yeah. In the best possible way and unlock it. Super easy said, very difficult in the execution, but in principle, I'm a big believer of this principle that is very, very powerful.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one last question. What does it mean today? You know, we saw building trust, building this consistency. Of course, it's super important to drive value. But many CMOs' budget today are under pressure, you know, so how do you make that case internally, you know, to this consistent and continuous investment in building the brand and earning trust? And what does ROI look like today? What is it today? And maybe we can go this.
I think that is the question of all questions, because of course it is very, very easy for a CFO to cut into brand budgets or the investment there, because normally before you see the results or get the bill, they have a new job. So it's always a bit of a time lag, but the benefit from the cuts, of course, is always very immediate. I think the most important factor of this is not the ROI. We do a lot of studies around what is the media ROI. We even when we look into what is the value of the brand, I always tend to say the value of the brand is what I get for the brand. So it's the price premium with consumers, of course, easy. But also we as Vodafone operate a bit like a Coca-Cola, so we use our brand in markets, in our own operations, but we also license the brand out. So in the end, to me, the brand value that I have is not what is in a study, however sophisticated. In the end, the brand value is, do I find someone out there who is prepared to pay a certain price for this? And this is really the ROI, and this is something that you can see, and we can test that at least from time to time. It's not that we expand and sell our brand in other markets every day, but it's an ongoing process, and we see it there. But it's always a little vague. So I think the most important is the belief in top management to say, in the end, the relationship to the customer that we have is the most important, and it will help us to survive in the long run. And if you don't invest into that now, and if you don't take this in new trade-off decision, because it's not a yes or no decision, it's a trade-off. Where do you take the money from? Where do you cut investments to shift the investments again? And if you don't have this top on your belief agenda with top management, you will never get there, because everybody will tell you on the ROI, oh, it's funny money. Where is it really? Do I see it bottom line? Do I not? So do I really believe it? To really put in some guardrails into, can I easily cut or not? Because it is so easy and such an easy thing to do to save the now, but sacrifice your future.
The long term.
Yeah.
How do you get leadership buy-in?
Yeah, so we kind of moved where brand was in terms of how people thought about it. By which I mean is, of course, we look at return on investment. Of course, we look at all of those things you would expect us to move. But we shifted the conversation because what we were able to do is look at brand consideration data over time and then look at our revenue performance. And what we could see is that brand consideration was a leading indicator of financial performance. And that then puts brand into a really different place. That's not like, why did you do it, rear view mirror? Instead, now our senior executives are saying, tell us when we're on consideration, because we think that that's going to affect our 2 to 3 year forecast. And as soon as you're looking at future performance as opposed to retrospective performance, then the way in which you think about brand investment changes quite significantly. And so I would encourage those of you that have the data, and if you don't have the data, start now, because you'll thank yourself in a few years. Because if you can show that correlation, and for us, you really can, then actually nobody wants to bet against the future, but it's easy to take money out for today. So that would be my top tip for everyone in the room.
Okay, Angie?
Strongly agree with that. My tip here, I think, is, weirdly enough, this is a question of trust. It's building internal trust, and you've got to be granted it before you earn it in a firm that is coming from a non-marketing led place. So if you want to affect a cultural change in an institutional asset manager, for example, my favourite quote I think that helps is in theory there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice there is. Right? So know your theory. You have the master of it. We're talking after this panel, but then think very hard how you can adapt it in practice. Yes, speak the language of the board. In our industry, it is about all the studies that show during a market downturn, you have stickier institutional money for higher brand recognition in asset management, for example. Think very hard about how you are set up internally. All the levers of marketing and communications, are they aligned or are they fragmented? Because fragmentation is the enemy of good execution in this world. Do people think you have a separate employer brand compared to your consumer brand, for example, or are you able to actually address all of them holistically? And then think through very carefully how you intend to pull the kind of levers to demonstrate the value of brand. We try to be relatively low cost, innovative, in-house, targeted on those sort of global institutional segments where we are seeking to drive our international growth, reflecting on the results, earning the trust, and going again. But I don't think there is a universal brand playbook. Certainly in our market, you've got to invent your own for the particulars of your organisation, its culture, its language, and its commercial objectives.
No. Thank you so much. Thank you again for coming here, for your presence, for sharing your thoughts. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.